Well, Blood West is a game. Okay, let me back up for a second here. Blood West was announced at Realms Deep last year with a fever dream trailer that gave the impression that we were getting a blistering occult-themed old western boomer shooter, and on sight, I was salivating over that immediately. I love Old West shit. I don't care if it's Red Dead Redemption or Red Dead Redemption 2. If it's Old West themed, I have a soft spot for it off the jump. But while the trailer held the promise of fanning the hammer on the old revolver while circle strafing around mutated devilry, the actual game itself that released into early access recently is a little more, subdued than the trailer seemed to imply. Yeah, this is definitely more of a stealth-focused shooter with immersive sim elements set in a weird West environment which looks, feels, and plays like a Slavjank Deus Ex with cowboys. My first hour playing through this game was rough. I was all over the place trying to figure out how combat worked, how hitboxes worked, how shooting worked, navigating systems which felt like they could allow me to be more aggressive than I really could, which diligently reminded me that this was supposed to be a game of stealth-based cat-and-mouse combat, because the player character is a glass cannon that can take maybe 2 or 3 direct hits up close depending on the zombie and then falls over into the dust and dirt, before being revived at a mysterious spirit totem and then gets the opportunity to head back into the prairie again. But what's bullshit about all of this is that this fucking game in which you are expected to die over and over again, will punish you for dying too many times in the form of inflicting curses that imbue negative status effects onto your character. Status effects which can only be negated by giving cursed gold to the totem or spending a fuck ton of money on a special potion. I swear to fucking God, I was ready to... Let's rewind a bit. Blood West is a new early access game from Polish developer Hyperstrange. I mentioned that they're from Poland because that informs a lot of this review. I have a personal connection to pretty much anything coming out of Poland due to the fact that I'm very Polish on my mother's side of the family. Growing up, we listened to polka and ate sauerkraut with Kielbasa and went to Polish Oktoberfest where I bought a Superman comic that was written in the Polish language that I spent weeks attempting to translate. Having that essence and aesthetic around me very much informed my taste in art and culture much more than the rest of my ancestry, which is a little odd considering I'm only 25% Polish and actually about 75% Irish. And yet, if you tell me a game studio is comprised of Polish developers, there is a 110% greater chance of me being interested in their games than if you didn't tell me that. The Polish are weird. They make weird design choices and have weird aesthetics compared to us here in America, which is possibly why CD Projekt Red's first Witcher game was so arresting. It focused on strange sex and weird body horror fraught with twisted vines and warped physiology, with muted brown colors dominating the landscape, flashes of bright hues here and there. The RPG system was awkward, the controls were horrendous, the music was odd, but the narrative was bold and vibrant, and the world was absolutely enveloping. It wasn't always fun to play, but it kept the player interested in what was coming around the corner. Look how far they've come. But anyway, I've played the Witcher games, and Painkiller, and Deadfall Adventures, all from Polish studios, and they all have a somewhat janky, off-kilter charm to them. Like playing a funhouse mirror of a game that isn't designed to necessarily be enjoyed, but to be experienced and endured. It makes you wonder just how much World War II really fucked up the Polish, doesn't it? God love them, the land of Umpapa, Polka, and Kielbasa and great beer also gave us Zdzisław Beksinski. And I love it, don't get me wrong here, kids, I will eat that shit up. Which is why walking into this game, I was 75% ready to get down on it, and 25% worried about what would be getting down on me. So, without further ado, kids, crack open that bottle of Żywiec and puszczamy dzieci. We open up with the player character rising from the dead, a gunslinger wearing a black hat and trench coat. Wait, wrong game. We open up with the player character rising from the dead, a gunslinger wearing a black hat and trench coat. Oh wait, what the fuck? Let me check my notes here. He finds a wicked sawed-off shotgun. Wrong game. He finds a wicked sawed-off shotgun. Okay, we're back on track here. And has a bevy of wicked one-liners at his disposal as he returns to life.
I live again.
Fuck, wait. No, that's not.
I live again.
Oh. Oh, dear. Seriously though, while cribbing heavily from the character of Caleb, comparisons there end pretty much immediately as our man with no name is resurrected by spirits unknown for the sole purpose of cleansing a dark evil from the surrounding lands. Spirits and vile creatures are running amok, so the totems revived our gunslinger, who is implied to have been a very bad man and who did very bad things while alive, as a means of fighting fire with fire. Erase the darkness of evil using the darkness of evil. Sure, it's kinda tropey, but Weird West stories like these tickle my fancy, so I won't give it too much shit, but despite an interesting setup, Blood West doesn't really know how to stick the landing, or know where it wants to land. Or maybe it just doesn't know how to land. As I mentioned at the top, my first hour was spent doing everything in the game completely wrong. I wanted to be able to run in guns blazing, which the game quickly told me was a very silly idea indeed. Zombies murked me in 1 or 2 hits, and I started accruing curses, those pesky negative status effects that stack up over time. For example, the first curse I endured hampered my stamina bar so that I had less stamina to access. You use stamina for swinging melee attacks, jumping, running, you get the drift. After dying 3 times, the curse finally stacks into a stain on my soul, which can only be removed by burying cursed gold in front of the totems. Meanwhile, I continued to die, which began to accrue an entirely different curse in the form of one that caused bleeding damage a lot easier than I normally received it, and I threw up my hands in frustration and quit the game. Of course, one of the lessons I've learned from reviewing games on this channel is that you're having a difficult time with a game the way you want to be playing it, then you might not be playing the game the way it's meant to be played. So I started up a brand new save file and lit out into the desert again, this time with a mind set on slow, stealthy behavior. Since there's so much importance placed on being sneaky, there should also be a lot of importance placed on those stealth mechanics, which there is, and yet somehow isn't. Detection comes in one of 2 ways. First, being heard by enemies. You'll see a meter for that down at the bottom of the screen. Crouching will quiet your footfalls so the meter fills up more slowly, but pausing in your tracks will allow the meter to run back down all the way. And second isn't being seen, which feels like it doesn't need much explanation. The meter goes up quicker the closer you are to an enemy and goes right back down if you duck out of sight. But what's all kind of funky about these mechanics is that while your ranged weapons are really fucking loud, simply firing your weapon doesn't seem to attract the attention of the devilish creatures about. There's one section of the early access where you're meandering around a fort looking for cursed objects, and at this point I had a Winchester rifle, so I was plugging holes in monsters from afar as much as possible. But even when I shot one of them in the head, the sound of the gunfire didn't appear to stir any enemies nearby, even though by rights I should have been attracting a lot of attention. So the stealth mechanics are almost kind of arbitrary, because if that kind of noise won't summon demons to come to try and kick my ass, but the sound of me running does, then I'm really questioning what exactly is triggering the noise mechanics. However, sound design is distinctly beautiful, a wonder to hear. Gunfire is beefy and punchy and never fails to satisfy. The watermelony crunch of a head going splat beneath an axe blade sent chills down my spine every single time. The various sound effects for all the creatures and their disgusting movements were unique, monstrous, and fucked up in the perfect kind of way. Everything you hear in this game sounds absolutely amazing, from footfalls to fight sounds. And yet, somehow, with all that attention to sound design, monsters can't hear me when they really ought to be able to. Stealth seems, for the most part, to be strictly based on whatever is in the immediate vicinity of your actions rather than across a map. So you can snipe a monster, have it turn to come search for you because it registered damage from your bullet, but the monster standing 3 feet to the left won't even blink. I do love that the bow and arrow says that it's meant for silent kills, but if my gunshots have the exact same radius as my footsteps, do quiet kills even matter that much? You won't be doing much gunplay in the beginning, however, and the game knows it, providing you with a 2-handed axe in the tutorial, which will be your bread and butter for gold rush exorcisms throughout most of the game. Primary fire is a quick swipe for basic damage, but holding down right mouse gives you a solid fucking charge attack, which can and will one-shot enemies if you sneak up on them, or two-shot them if they're coming up on you. You can and must be sneaky until you've leveled up a little bit, because otherwise you're in for those curses on your souls, kids. Our gunslinger is fucking squishy. Squishier than SpongeBob soaking up all that seawater. God Christ. Even deep into the game at level 5 and running around like a bat out of hell, I was still able to get fucked in 2 hits by one of the shotgun-wielding prodigal daughters. Blood West does not, I repeat, does not make this shit easy on you. But, fortunately, spill enough blood on the desert hardpan and you'll level up slowly, acquiring skill points which you can spend however you want. In true imsim fashion, you can choose to tank yourself up, pick a more stealth-focused path, make your reload speeds quicker, you get the idea. All of these perks can and will make your life easier, but make sure sure you put some thought into what you want to unlock before you leap forth. Each level up grants you 3 skill points at a time, and since these skills can be purchased in any order, you could very easily choose just one skill that costs 3 points, or spend points on one that costs 2 and another that costs 1. I tried to be as frugal as possible and make sure every level gained counted. As you go along, you'll be looting buildings and bodies and literally anything and everything you can find. Inventory storage is grid-based like in System Shock or Deus Ex, but I never had any issues with too much shit in my stock. A trader named Jim rests near the center of the world map with one of the totems, so you'll find yourself close to someone you can unload all of your junk onto as you pick it up. And trust me, you're going to want to pick up everything to sell for that sweet, sweet coin. Old Western economy rules the day here, so a bottle of health potion costing $100 might not sound like much, but when everything you're selling pays you something like $4 or $5 a pop, some of the much pricier items feel, well, kind of unattainable. Meanwhile, you'll also find healing items such as bandages and alcohol. Yes, alcohol has healing and positive status effects. And also such items as the gold coin, which will prevent you from getting cursed when you die, but it only works once, so if you use it, you'd better hope you have enough cash to buy another. Fortunately for Not Caleb, you can pick up weapons off of dead enemies to give yourself a head start on bringing the pain. Scattered here and there in the map are other weapons lying around for your pleasurable searchings, including that Winchester rifle I mentioned, and a sweet, fucked up, double-barreled sawed-off called a decapitator, which appears to have demonic essence imbued into it and returns 5 HP for every headshot you get with it, and the gun literally cackles with demonic glee when you do so. Yeah, that didn't leave my inventory after that. But the basic weaponry consists of axes, knives, revolvers, shotguns, and rifles. For the love of God, though, make sure you upgrade your reload speed as soon as you can, because it takes fucking forever to load the goddamn revolver and the Winchester. Worse than a goddamn loading screen on a 386. All of this would be frustrating if the controls didn't complement the gameplay, and fortunately they do. I only had to adjust the mouse speed once or twice, the key bindings are intuitive, aiming is pretty fair. Hitboxes with melee took some getting used to, however. Starting out, I thought I had to be a hell of a lot closer with the axe than I really needed to be. After a few swings, you'll be able to gauge the distance better, but keep in mind that the axe has some serious reach, and that you can land attacks from a lot further than you think. Now, as you've been watching all of this footage, you've probably noted that Blood West falls squarely into that uncanny valley of modern indie shooter that channels 1998 so well it looks as though it literally released that year style graphics. 100% my favorite aspect of Blood West are the visuals. Crunchy, ugly textures on what look like low poly models but are deceptively well animated and executed. From the perspective of crafting an experience that channels playing an immersive sim circa 1998, Blood West absolutely 100% nails that atmosphere. The closest game I can compare the visual aesthetic to would be Graven, which also somehow perfectly captures that early era of 3D engines trying to compete with Quake and Unreal. For that alone, I love this game. I fuck with this game. I can't get enough of the visuals. The twisted fucking monster designs. Jesus Christ. These creatures are fucked up in a way that only Polish Slav jank body horror can do. Gorgeous, exaggerated, full of twisted fuckery, like the Birdman with his wings and what looks like a crow beak coming out of his formerly human mouth. The humanpede, which... oh, fuck, look at this thing. It spits acid and makes the most horrific noises. The standard undead humans have teeth coming out of teeth, but the prodigal daughter is peak jank. Peak jank. Prominently featured in the game's main menu. Just tell me what your first thoughts would be if this was the first thing you saw on opening up this game, because this is what I saw. When you run into the prodigal daughters, they hunt you down quickly with extreme prejudice, bearing down with their shotguns, and if you happen to blow off their masks, they get even more vicious. You'll find letters scattered about the town written by someone that describe the monsters and their weaknesses, and the prodigal daughter appears to be all about her vanity and looking beautiful and perfect, so if her mask is torn off or blown off, she gets pissed off over her ugly face. I'm not going to call it necessarily misogynistic, but having what is essentially a sex worker with big titties and big ass, look at this ass, focused primarily on how she looks as a character type, feels a little 1998 in the worst kind of way, you follow me? In fact, I'm not 100% sure we're even doing the Native American aspects of the game much service here either. The shaman we meet refers to a train as an iron horse. The totem at one point refers to the natives as Indians. Look, it's 2022. We're well past confusing these people with these people, just because a genocidal fuck got lost on his way to making a name for himself. Yeah, Blood West feels like a collection of Old West tropes merged with occult themes in the kind of way that Italian directors created spaghetti westerns back in the 70s, with giant mythical landscapes of a mythological America that had no grasp of the true geography, instead focusing on the tropes of the cowboys, gunslingers, outlaws, dialing the stereotypes to 11 in order to craft iconic imagery. Realism be damned. Blood West attempts the same, a tale of the Weird West, but through the perspective of the Poles, who, for all I know, have only seen cowboy movies, hell, possibly even spaghetti westerns, and used that as their basis for what the West must have felt like. The result is a weird, strange blend of aesthetics in a world that is simultaneously cartoonish and yet textured, where we, the American players, understand the weight and feel of a six-shooter or a Winchester, of the sound of boots walking over the railroad tracks in hardpan, the creaking of wood and the strumming of a guitar to announce a Western soundtrack. We understand these things because, tropey or no, these are sensations and stimulations built into our American minds and experiences, glorified from a past that is filled with atrocities and misfortunes, but painted white with glory, honor, and the adventure of the Wild West. We as Americans know these and understand these images and sounds and feelings because we've been inundated with them in a strange kind of patriotic weaponization. The Wild West was the last frontier, the prairie, the horseback riders, the trains, gold, guns, glory, hallelujah. And so this game seems to draw from all of those and uses it in a strange, dark method that utilizes that larger-than-life imagery, but doesn't seem to understand where it came from, nor does it really seem to know what it wants to do with those other than be kind of spooky. It's a Polish perspective on American westerns, much like Silent Hill was a Japanese perspective on American horror. Meanwhile, Blood West infuses all of this with the kind of dark body horror that seems to be a trend that I've noticed in other Polish games, the loss of control of one's own bodily autonomy. Our protagonist is not in control of his body. He died, was resurrected, and if he dies again, he will be resurrected again without his consent. The monsters throughout the town have no control over their bodies. They have been warped by the evil curse being spread across the land without their consent and are being used against their will to further that spread. In The Witcher, Geralt's autonomy was taken from him when he was mutated into a Witcher. In the game Darkwood, also from a Polish developer, a strange dark forest manipulates and mutates human beings into grisly monsters. Is that something that plays into the themes of this game? I don't really know. I know it's there because I can see it's there, which is a very interesting element of Polish horror, but the world and aesthetics of this game are very superficial, a facade that offers allure, but not much depth underneath. Blood West doesn't really have an effective narrative, nor does it have particularly compelling plot. Rise from the dead, go fight evil, if you die you get to go at it again until you get it right. There's elements of a story, with characters to talk to and threads of ideas that halfway tie different quests together, but there isn't anything to the story other than that. It succeeds primarily in crafting effective visuals within mostly effective gameplay mechanics, which I couldn't really tell if the stealth aspects were working the way they were intended, or if they just worked because they wanted to when they wanted to. I also never felt like I was rewarded for putting in the work to level up, because no matter what, I got hurt far too easily for a game that punishes you for dying. I appreciate games like Spelunky and Hades, where death is an expected aspect of the game, even one that is at times welcomed because then you learn something from that death. But if dying is going to be frequent or even difficult to avoid, a system of punishment for accruing deaths shouldn't be in place, especially one that actively works against a player with stacked negative status effects. One great part of this game is that I never ran into any noticeable bugs or glitches, but there is a plethora of typos littered throughout the text. Chalk it up to English not being the first language of the devs, but for something this polished, seeing bad localization makes it feel less like it's coming from a prestigious studio and more like a first-time dollar bin asset flip. I can't even make fun of it. It's just jarring to see so many typos in a game of this caliber. Blood West does what it sets out to do, which is put the player in the very fragile boots of an undead gunslinger out to purge evil. It's simple, straightforward, and appears to offer more depth than that through the stealth and inventory mechanics, but really it just doesn't. Did I enjoy playing it? Yeah, after a spell once I settled in and started playing the game the way it wanted me to play it. But do I think that this is a game to be recommended? I'm honestly not sure. It's hard to recommend the first of the Witcher trilogy, for example. That's an awkward game with great moments and a satisfying core, but at the end of the day, it's hard to get into. CD Projekt Red put in the work to improve that series over time, and Witcher 3 was one of the best games I've ever played. But the first Witcher is weird, slightly inaccessible, and gives players no quarter. Blood West is weird, slightly inaccessible, and gives players no quarter. It's certainly intriguing to play once you get down to brass tacks and study the landscape, but it also feels opaque, like a game that had a dream about the Old West filled with monsters and tried to replicate it. Punishing, mean at times, and confusing at others. If it weren't for the quality of the visuals and the excellent sound design, I'd probably be giving this opening act of Blood West's early access a lower score. There is a quality game lurking somewhere in this strange presentation, but even though I enjoyed playing it, I ultimately wasn't sure why I was playing it, and I'm not really sure how much mileage this game can get out of what's here. My final score is a 7 out of 10. Kids, all jokes aside, I do love me some games from Polish studios, so I'm wishing Hyperstrange the best here. Would love to see those typos ironed out, and maybe the difficulty nerfed by just a tad. I can handle stacked curses for dying if dying wasn't so goddamn easy to do in this game, but I digress. Blood West had an interesting boss fight at the end of it, which gives me hope for future content updates, so we'll see how it goes. In the meantime, stay hydrated, remember to roll your shoulders back when you're sitting at your computer desk, and stay safe out there, kids. We'll see you next time.